Hi, I'm Teresa Kendall, a learning and development enthusiast and talent development expert. If you're here because you're new to training, or if you find yourself needing to create or deliver training without any idea of where to start, never fear. I started out in my career just like you. I made every mistake in the book along the way, and I also discovered that I love helping others learn at work. I'm here to share my tips and tricks with you so that you can wow your department, your team, and your boss with your training skills. In this video, I'm going to share with you how to create an amazing and engaging training session in 60 minutes or less. If training isn't already your day job, it can be really hard to find or make time to prep a high-quality session for your audience. But you have something going for you already. You're already likely an expert in the subject you need to conduct training about. Now all we need to do is channel that expertise with some simple training design principles, and you'll be good to go. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel for even more helpful content along your journey. So let's start at the beginning. Your first 5 minutes should be spent defining your goal, objectives, and audience. So write down the answers to these questions. First of all, who are you training? Is this content relevant for them? Do this so that you can keep them in your mind during the rest of your development. Second is, what do you want people to do when this training is over? This helps you clearly define your goal. And then once you have your main goal, write out the individual things your audience should be able to do once the training is over to reach your goal. They should always start with action verbs. So for example, explain our new product offering to clients, or use our new CRM software to track customer engagement. Then, spend the next 10 minutes or so mapping out about 15 to 20 minutes of relevant content you're going to teach people. You can use the 5 W's to really quickly map out what people need to know in this training session. Think about things like, why do they need to know how to do this? What are you expecting them to do, and who will be completing each step? When, where, and how are you expecting them to do this? Content should take learners about 15 to 20 minutes to digest. This is the optimal amount of time spent on content before attention spans start to wander, and our brains become less effective at taking in new information. If you have more information than will fit into this time frame, it's time to start thinking about how you can break up the content into chunks for people so that they can digest it one piece at a time. The longest chunk of your time you have, about 20 minutes, should be spent putting together an activity or two for your training session. An activity is arguably the most important part of the training because it's the part where you engage your audience and actually let them interact with the material, also allowing them to bring their own experience to the table. When developing an activity, consider the following questions. First, go back to your goals and objectives you wrote in step 1. What is the easiest way to tell if people can actually do the thing you want them to do after the training? What's a realistic scenario your learners may encounter this new content? I highly recommend making your activity scenario-based no matter what approach you use, because it gives your audience relevant, application-based ways to interact with the material. This process includes coming up with a scenario that includes a problem for the learners to solve and questions for them to answer. Keep it short and simple. 1 problem, 1 to 2 questions. But my advice is if your group is larger than 5, you should be creating multiple scenarios to cover a wide range of possible experiences. And consider logistics. How many people will be in each session? How will the training be delivered? Are you doing it virtually or in person? Are you using virtual tools like Zoom or WebEx that allow you to pair people up or put them in small groups easily? And then once you determine the activity, you need to create the materials. And don't overcomplicate this. This could be as simple as a couple of Word documents with different scenarios and probing questions for them to answer. It could be setting up an idea board for them to use, or creating a quick online quiz game. Maybe even putting together a simple PowerPoint slide with some instructions for an in-person activity. All right, so we're moving on to the next step. The next 10 minutes should be spent putting together your overall plan for the training session. And there are usually a lot of options to consider with this step, as well as the previous one. So again, my advice is to not overthink things. Go with your gut, go with what feels right, and the quickest way to meet your goal. So in this step, you need to take your goals, objectives, content, and activity and figure out how you want to package it and present it to your learners. A couple of things to remember here. Like I said earlier, content should be delivered in 15 to 20 minute chunks in order to be the most effective. It also does not have to be delivered live. So you could create a job aid, an infographic, a short video, something like that can be given to learners before the session if the content is simple enough. And I would argue that if you're going to be spending time together, either in person or via a webinar, that should be time spent in active discussion versus passively listening to a presentation. For example, a couple of options you could consider for your plan include, your audience or learners spend 15 minutes reading or watching content prior to a 30 to 60 minute webinar where they complete a group activity, where they receive a case study and need to solve a problem or answer questions, and then debrief with the team. You could have a subject matter expert spend 15 to 20 minutes presenting content, and then the group spends 30 minutes in a pair activity practicing a new technical skill. During the debrief, volunteers can demonstrate for the team. Or you could even have content that's spread out over 30 to 60 minutes, but every 15 to 20 minutes you should stop to answer a couple of quiz questions to reinforce what you just discussed. So you've already made it to the last step, step 5, and you have 15 minutes left to assemble other training materials. Other training materials you might assemble outside of the activity could include a PowerPoint or a job aid with your content. It could also include things like locating process documentation to send ahead of your training. But remember, simple is best, and images are always better than text. Don't overload your slides with a bunch of words where a single image could best represent them. Your slides do not have to double as step-by-step documentation for your learners. This is training, not documentation. Keeping slides simple also allows you to create them more quickly, thus being able to do something like this in 15 minutes. So to recap, there are 5 simple steps you can take to develop an amazing training session. Your first 2 steps are really just mapping out what you already know. Who needs training? What's the topic? What do they need to be able to do? Given your background, that shouldn't take too long, and you need to be laser focused on what you want people to do when the training is over. Spend the most time developing a fun activity for learners to complete. Active learning is always more effective than passive learning, particularly for adults. If you want it to work, do something active. Map out your training session so you can get the most out of your time with your learners. We all have Zoom fatigue at this point, so don't spend your precious time with your learners being a sage on a stage. Spend it getting your audience engaged in their own learning. And then finally, step 5 is putting it all together, so create your presentation or job aid to go along with your activity. Remember to keep it simple. Less is more, both for your audience and for your ability to be done with work at a reasonable hour. Thanks for watching. I'm Teresa Kendall, your learning and development enthusiast. Be sure to stay tuned for my next video where I'm going to share some tips to make your next webinar even more engaging.